Dzień dobry. Today is the Katyn Massacre Remembrance Day on April the 13th. Because in 1940, April and May, the Soviets killed 22,000 Polish officers and intellectuals in the Katyn forest. So I have found some very old footage to explain what possibly happened. If you do enjoy this, please do hit that like button to support the channel and subscribe for more. As I said, it's old footage.
St. Luke's churchyard in Chelsea. Charles Dickens was married here. For Londoners today, it's just somewhere for a quiet lunch hour. But for Vladislav Chiki and Professor Zdzislav Stahl, it will soon have a special meaning. They are Londoners now, but once they were officers in the Polish army. In this churchyard will be the only memorial to 15,000 of their comrades who died mysteriously in Russia during the war. Some were found buried in a forest called Katyn. The rest vanished without trace. In this issue, Echo looks into one of the last unresolved crimes of the last war, the Katyn massacres.
Bear in mind, in 1940, the Soviets were still on the Allied side, right? So they were aligned with Poland in a sense. So this is probably what, obviously the deaths don't help, but why would they do it to who were meant to be their ally? That's definitely seems to be a war crime, although most of war is a crime, but it was just horrific, absolutely horrific. 22,000 at least that were killed. Why? I don't know. Let's see if we can find out.
September 1939. Hitler invades Poland. The Second World War begins. While the German armies advanced from the west, the Soviets crossed Poland's eastern frontiers. Caught in a massive pincer, the Polish army collapsed and surrendered. The victors divided the country down the middle and imprisoned every soldier they captured. Russia took over 200,000. 15,000, half Poland's officer corps, were never seen alive again. Many were to die near Smolensk, in a forest called Katyn. When they died and who killed them has been one of the great unresolved mysteries of the last war. In time, the Germans were to accuse the Russians, and the Russians were to accuse the Germans. Whoever did it destroyed half Poland's future leadership.
Wow.
All we know for certain is that they died like this.
It's horrific, right? Absolutely horrific to think. It's trying to now think of things because it just imagine being in that situation. And what are you going to do? If you are one of these military officers, it's not about being brave or anything like that. If you've got a gun to your back, you don't necessarily know the final outcome, obviously, but you can't turn around and do anything because it was a guarantee that you were going to be put to sleep, if that makes sense. I can only imagine And things like this have happened around the world for such a long time. And yeah, I just imagine, well, you don't even want to imagine being in that situation where you are helpless, absolutely helpless. But the thing is, how did they get away with it? How did the Soviets, which I'm pretty sure it was the Soviets, how did the Soviets get away with it in a time that I'm sure the Soviets were meant to be, in 1940, were meant to be allies with the Poles? If there's some sort of confusion, I don't get it. So please explain if in the comments down below if there is anything extra details that I'm missing.
Postcards from relatives in Poland began to be returned undelivered in the spring of 1940, a year after their capture. So began the mystery. A year later, German armies were deep in Russia. Poland was an ally. Her men were released. Sikorsky, Poland's leader, flew in. His officers were missing. Why? The Russians were evasive. Sikorsky demanded to see Stalin. Already he knew that until spring 1940, the men had been in 3 camps: Kozelsk, Ostashkov, and Starobelsk. Faced with this evidence, Stalin claimed they'd escaped 4,000 miles to Manchuria. Sikorsky didn't believe him, but neither could he believe the men were dead. Just 400 of the 15,000 were to survive. One was a young cadet officer, Vladislav Chiki.
I was an inmate of the camp at Kozelsk. We were there about 4,500 prisoners. I was a cadet officer. In April 1940, the Soviet administration of the camp started taking practically every day a batch of officers, about 70 up to 300 men at a time, and were taking them out of the camp. We didn't know anything as to their destination. Next time they were heard of was not until April 1943, when the German army discovered the mass grave in the Katyn forest. Their bodies were lying in the same order as the groups were leaving our camp.
Wow.
They were dressed in the same winter uniforms in which we survived the winter 1939-1940. Of course, the evidence produced later by the Russians tried to indicate that they were murdered in August or September. But August and September in Russia, in that part of Russia, the weather is very hot.
To the Germans, it was a chance to split the Allies. To Katyn, they brought an investigation commission, the press, and even the Polish Red Cross. The Poles were suspicious. They didn't want to believe the Nazis, but piece by piece, the evidence began to mount up.
The Germans discovered or retrieved from the bodies hundreds of various documents. First of all, Russian newspapers, then letters and correspondence from Poland to the prisoners of war, and also diaries. Now, none of these documents showed any date which was beyond May 1940. There was a diary kept by a Major Solski, who kept the entries until the very last moment. In fact, his last entry was, we are in a forest, and suddenly it dropped.
The investigators agreed. The men died while Germany and Russia were still at peace, but now their time had run out.
So the Germans and Russians at this point were still in peace. The Russians then hadn't necessarily joined the war, but so what were the Russians planning on doing before that then? So this is a period then, if this is what they're saying, it was before the Russians maybe declared war on the Germans. So you've got to think, what were the Russians planning? Maybe before the World War started, the Russians were planning something themselves. And imagine then, if, for example, if Hitler hadn't started a war, what went next? What would have happened instead? Would it have been the Red Army sweeping across Europe, or just to Poland? I don't know. But this is another thing that I've never heard of. This is not something you hear about in school or normally in any films or books. But what were they up to? What the hell were they up to? And this certainly puts a different light. I say a different light. It adds to a light that was already shining on Russia. We all know Russians' past. We all know Russian aggression and things like that. And I think this sort of situation adds to it. But it's truly horrific. I didn't have a clue about this. So you've got to share these messages with people so people are aware of these sort of situations and these horrendous atrocities.
For the Red Army, the tide of war had changed. Soon Smolensk and Katyn were theirs again. The dead were not allowed to rest. The Russians, refusing an international investigation, appointed their own men. No Poles were invited.
Well, convenient.
Their experts, of course, accused the Germans. The whole grisly process was repeated. But once more, the accused were not there to answer. New evidence was produced, but world opinion remained confused. Only 4,000 were found in Katyn. The rest they never accounted for.
In Katyn were discovered the bodies of the prisoners of war from the Koziers camp only, over 4,000. But at the same time, we lost still 2 camps of prisoners of war. About nearly 4,000 from Starobelsk and over 6,000 from Ostashkov. We had to assume that they were liquidated in the same manner, but in some other places.
In my view, the crime was committed by the Russians, and all the evidence, facts, points to their guilt.
I'm also of this opinion as a majority of Poles. The crime of Katyn was committed by the Soviet government. And I'm sure any impartial international tribunal would find Soviet government guilty of this mass murder.
Somewhere the killers still live. Their memories are their only punishment.
Wow. Wow. Something I knew absolutely nothing about. That is just crazy and deeply disturbing at the same time. So I obviously don't know, and I'd love for the comments. This is where you guys come in, my audience. I've learnt about what's happened, but is there anything extra that is now known? Because this video, I think, is brilliant because it was there was footage from the time and the discoveries and things, but obviously it's not showing if there has been any more discoveries since. So in the comments, please do let me know, because I do read them. Have more bodies been found? Have the Russians been found guilty of this? Is it still one of those unsolved crimes? And when I say unsolved crimes, just not written down on paper, basically. Has anyone taken accountability for this? Because And what were the Russians going to do if World War II didn't start? Were they going to start World War II? That's the crazy thing now I'm thinking. Because this is, what you'd assume then is before World War II properly kicked off and the Russians joined in. This was before that. So, oh my God. Bloody Russians and Germans and the poor Poles that have been through so much. It's just constant. It's over and over and over again. There's always something that the Poles have had to go through and suffer. It is shocking. And I just hope, I'm sure the world is a better place, but is it? Is it? The same things happen over and over again. The Israel, Gaza, you've got Ukraine, Russia at the moment. There's always these constant atrocities, and it's just like, get a grip, people. Why do we think it's okay to go around killing each other? I don't understand. I don't understand why people think it's okay. It's not okay. But I'm glad I know about this. And as I said earlier on, these sort of situations, these sort of events are things that we don't necessarily know about, and the world should know about to hopefully try and stop them happening again, and to enlighten people and to make people are aware. So I'm glad I found out about this. But yeah, please do, if you've got any thoughts, let me know down in the comments. It's truly horrific, truly awful. But I thank you so much for watching. Also, their English was very, very good. I was very impressed with their English. But thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. Do widzenia.